And that's kind of, I guess, where we want to start the podcast. Is you shot a deer in Ohio on public land early season that year that scored like 186, right?
Yes, sir.
And you've kind of every year since then you've really killed a pretty nice one, kind of using the same tactic, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I just kind of want to get on here and just break that down, how you go about killing these deer early season in hill country. Not always the easiest task. Early season in hill country can be kind of tough. So I thought the best way to do it would just be to maybe tell the story of that buck in 2019, kind of the start of it, and we can kind of dissect it from there, or talk about at least the key moments in time whenever you went from finding the buck to killing it.
Yeah, so it starts way before 2019. I grew up hunting hill country mixed with a little bit of ag. So I would say 50 acre and under fields for the most part. I struggled when I was growing up trying to find good deer. And then I eventually figured out how to be mobile without a tree stand and get on good deer. And then I got my first climber, and it's evolved ever since then. But I was always lacking something, and I went in service and I moved back home. And when I moved back home, that was about the time that I found really Dan. I mean, that was a big influence on the hunting tactics that I've implemented and that I've kind of evolved into my own system over the years through just hunting a lot and being out there in the woods a lot. But yeah, that's really what kicked it off for me. Up to that point, I never thought about a buck's bed necessarily. Like, I knew that deer bedded in certain areas, and growing up, I was always taught, stay out of those areas. Don't be intrusive to those areas because you won't kill a big deer. And I believed in that for a long time. So yeah, I found Dan, I found a couple other guys, and I found the Hunting Beast. And I started just, taking on little tidbits of information. And I'm the kind of person where if I learn something, I really have to go out and do it, or I won't retain it. And so it was very important to me to spend a lot of time in the woods. So coming down into Ohio, I've always loved early season. I've always been the guy that's out scouting a lot, and I've trying to pattern deer. And in high school, I was just filming deer while other people were at parties or hanging out or playing football or anything like that. Like, I was always doing something in the summer to try to pattern deer, and I ended up having some decent success doing that. And so coming down here, that was kind of my system. I decided that I'm going to go out and I'm going to scout really hard. And I'm going to try to find beds based on, at the time, beast tactics. That's what I knew. I really believed in it because I saw it work quite a bit. And so I, got on my Onyx at the time, and I scouted I can't even tell you how many hours on Onyx. I wouldn't be productive at work sometimes. I wasn't sleeping very much. I was trying to find areas that set up, leeward. So down here with the southwest wind, I want to find ridge systems that are generally facing to the north or to the east. And I really like it if they have a very obvious destination food source. So in a lot of cases, like a private ag field. And then what I would do is I would put boots on the ground to try to find specific bedding, specific travel corridors, and my favorite thing, hub scrapes or secondary food sources in between the destination food source for the night. So, that was kind of my plan throughout the summer. I had June, July, and August to really fine tune that. And I spent a ton of time, maybe spread myself a little bit too thin throughout Ohio, where I was driving up to like 2 hours to some of these very specific spots. And September hit, and I told myself, you know what, you've done enough work at this point. I think that you're good to go. And that lasted about an hour and a half. And then I decided that I wanted to go scout another piece. That's the piece I ended up killing my deer on. So like that OCD factor, I guess, is what kind of led me to that deer, because I had to have more knowledge and more information, and I wanted to scout right up until season. So at the time I had 4 or 5 cameras total, and I had one left. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go into the spot to hang a camera up. And I crossed the top of the ridge. It was like an 8-mile loop that day, and it was really hot out. I ended up getting into seed ticks really bad. So I was covered in seed ticks pretty early, and worked down this ridge system. And there was like probably 10 different ridges that faced east. The points of the ridges faced east. And then 300 yards below that, it was a private ag field. And so, well, if they're bedded on those points and that ag field still has corn in it, there's a pretty good chance that those deer are jumping down off their beds and beelining to that cornfield. And if I can find the right point with the right beds on it and the good sign, I think that I can make, a play on a deer. At the time, I just wanted a good buck. Like I'm from New York. I'm in Ohio now. I'm all excited about it. I just want a good buck. Like that's what I care about. And, so I scouted down through all those ridges and I had one left, and I was so hot and dehydrated and miserable that I almost gave up. I was really thinking about trekking the, 2 miles back to the truck. But I decided that, you know what, I'm just going to go to that last ridge. I haven't seen a lot of sign all day, but I'm going to go check the last one. And if it's junk, I'm going to get out of here. So I got to that last ridge, and I remember I crossed the top of like the second to last ridge, and I was coming down into the bottom. And it was torched with deer sign. There was big tracks all over the place. There was little rubs that were fresh, which got me really excited. There was a couple scrapes that were opened up. They had pee in them still, so it was fresh. And as I worked up that next ridge point, I ended up seeing a giant rub, like a really big fresh rub. And at the time, it was the biggest rub I've ever seen. And I was thinking like, man, it's the first week. I think it was like maybe the 10th of September. Like that's very odd to me to see a rub of that size here this time of year. Like I don't see that back in New York. So the curiosity got me, and I headed up to the rub, and I get to the rub, and then I see a scrape. And I was like, okay, well, there's a scrape right there, and there's this ridge dumping down from here, and there's 2 or 3 other sub ridges that kind of dump down in the same area, and it makes like a little hub. I was like, I want to go check out that scrape. And I took 2 or 3 more steps, and I jumped the biggest deer I've ever seen, right off of a bed, right, 80 yards above that scrape in a thicket. And I could see him as he ran off. I could see giant antlers. I mean, I was thinking, 150-inch deer probably. Like I had no idea at the time. It was the biggest buck I've ever seen. So I was ecstatic. So what I was telling myself is, you've seen this before in New York. You've seen these beds like this. You've seen them travel to these food sources, and especially the first day or two of season, if you're the first person to make a play on that deer, you might have a really good chance of catching him coming to that food source still before he gets boogered up by anybody, especially if you have the right wind. So I made a plan. I put a camera on that scrape, and season rolls around. So day one, we ended up having a crazy wind. I believe it was like a southeast wind, and I don't have a way to get in there and hunt that deer. So I decided I'm going to hold off. I hunted a CRP field and didn't have any luck. I saw one doe. And then day 2, I had my southwest wind that I was looking for. So the cool thing about the spot is you can access from the east or the west. But the access on the east is like kind of on a major, it's not a highway, but it's like a major road. So it's kind of like it's uncomfortable to park there. You have to pull off in the ditch a little bit, and it's very uncomfortable for me. I'm in a new area. So I throw my stand on my back, I cross a big creek, and I start working up into there. And I generally, for these hunts, like to leave the house or like to be leaving the truck about 11 o'clock. And then I'll work in, 1, 2 o'clock looking for sign on my way in. And then I try to get set up, and I try to just sit there and wait, especially if I have a good wind and I know my thermals aren't going to dump down the wrong way. So I started working in, and I get down in the bottom of the first hub. So you have like where the ridge fully comes down to the bottom, there's a hub, but the better hub was the one that was like, maybe a third of the way up that ridge where all those sub ridges met. So that was like a better area. That scrape seemed to be hit a little bit more. So I kept telling myself, okay, you have the destination food source. You've got the secondary food source, which was a white oak tree that scrape was underneath, and you know where he's bedded. Like if you can shoot that secondary food source without getting winded, if I can make it there, get set up, and be ready without getting winded, I feel like I have a really good chance at having that buck or a good buck come off of that bed, headed down towards the creek and then towards the field. It was really hot that day. It was 95 degrees out. And so I assumed that he might want to come down for water at some point as well. The creek was only at absolute max, like maybe 200 yards from his bed. So I worked my way up, and I ended up getting set up. It took me a long time to get set up. It was a pretty calm day overall. So I was waiting for like any sort of breeze that I would get to hang a stick, or if a squirrel would chatter, I'd hang a stick, and then I would just sit there and wait. And kept waiting, kept waiting. I finally got to the point where I was set up, about 20 feet high. I had one branch that was like right behind my head that gave me a little bit of cover, and that was kind of my target, like getting the cover. Yeah, I got set up and I started doing some filming, and it was really early. It was like 3:30 in the afternoon. I ended up hearing a stick crack, and I looked to my left and I could see a good buck walking straight down the ridge. And then I saw him turn and start like almost jogging towards the oak tree. And so I got my bow ready and I got my camera swung around, and I pulled up my binoculars real fast, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a good buck. It's got long tines. It looks like a good deer. And he came right into that oak tree at 30 yards and put his head down and started eating white oaks. The way that it set up, I had it just off. So the wind was a southwest wind, but it wasn't very breezy. It was like maybe 5 to 7 miles per hour. And then it's a very steep, like a north face on the front of it. It's an eastern facing ridge, but the north side of it is where he was bedded, and it was shaded. So I didn't have a very hard thermal pull the whole night. So I had a just off wind, and he circled down to that white oak tree, and I ended up shooting him at 30 yards.